there's a new scandal. Speaker, these are the prophetic words of the Honourable Member for Papineau, our current Prime Minister of Canada. And how true those words ring today. After 9 years of scandal, corruption, and Liberal entitlement, the business of the House has been put on hold to discuss a new scandal of monumental proportions, the Green Slush Fund. This government didn't like the fact that the former chair of Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or SDTC, was being publicly critical of their agenda. So they fired him and replaced him with one of their friends. This replacement was known to the government as holding blatant conflicts, as she had interests in companies receiving funding from CDTC. The PMO, PCO, and the minister were warned about these conflicts and the risks involved, but they appointed her anyway. The new chair went on to create an environment where conflicts of interest are tolerated and managed by board directors. What ensued was the creation of a slush fund for Liberal insiders. The Auditor General found the SDTC gave out $390 million taxpayer dollars in inappropriate contracts. This included $58 million to 10 projects that couldn't account for an environmental benefit or the development of green technology. In 180 cases, it included $334 million to projects in which board members held a conflict of interest. All the while, senior Industry Canada officials witnessed these conflicts but did not intervene. The Auditor General herself placed the blame directly on the industry minister, who did not sufficiently monitor the contracts that were being given out. The minister was going further than that. He was actively covering up the existence of these shady deals. Where he failed, this side of the House attempted to deliver some form of accountability for taxpayer money. Before adjourning for the summer, this House adopted a motion calling for documents related to SDTC to be turned over to the RCMP for review. At no point in the motion did it say that the instructions were optional. At no point did it instruct the government to redact information. And as you know, Speaker, the House enjoys the absolute and unbound power to order the production of documents, period. You found that this government's refusal to properly comply with the House order constituted a breach of privilege. That's our government. This wasn't a simple mistake by this NDP Liberal government. It was a calculated maneuver to avoid the discovery of any potential criminal activity that may have occurred under this government's watch. The SDTC whistleblower had suggested as much. They admitted that the Auditor General's investigation only scraped the surface, and if her investigation was focused on the real intent of those transactions, of course they would find criminal activity. And Speaker, thank goodness, breaking news yesterday, the RCMP has announced that they will be investigating, and of course they have full authority to substantiate any criminal activities that occurred within this organization. The fact that the NDP Liberals have tried to cover them up and prevent Parliament from shining a light on these transactions is a serious, serious indictment of their disdain for our democratic system. For the sake of our country and our reputation around the world, I wish the Green Slush Fund was the only case of corruption and disrespect for Parliament. Now it's been 2 speakers who have ordered the government to produce documents requested by this House, by this Parliament, and on both occasions, Liberals have failed to do so. The former Speaker found that the Liberals breached parliamentary privilege when they refused to produce House-ordered documents regarding the transfer of Ebola and Henipah viruses from the Winnipeg lab to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the subsequent revocation of security clearances of 2 Chinese nationals. For the Prime Minister, the Conservatives wanted to know why 2 scientists with deep connections to the Chinese military were even able to obtain high-level Canadian security clearances and conduct work with dangerous viruses. What was this government's reaction? They thumbed their noses at Parliament. Conservatives ensured that the President of the Public Health Agency was called to the bar of the House of Commons to be reprimanded by the Speaker, something that this Parliament has not had happened in over 100 years, also related to the pandemic, was when the Prime Minister decided to use it for his own partisan gain. Canadians did not want an election in 2021, but he decided to call one anyways, based on differences of opinion between the Liberals and Conservatives on how the pandemic could be managed, and he thought he could wedge Canadians. For the Prime Minister, it was his way or the highway. The Prime Minister rolled the dice, and Canadians said no way. He failed to get a majority, but destroyed so many people's lives in the process. He verbally abused, wrongfully accused, and denies culpability for the physical, the mental, and financial harms inflicted on Canadians. He realized, actually, that he couldn't make COVID vaccines his supposed ticket to a majority government if our Canadian Armed Forces members were not fully vaccinated, and so ordered our serving members, who were put through a horrific process of mandates, restrictions, and punishment, which left our ranks depleted, our men and women in uniform demoralized, and many seriously injured. The ramifications of his decisions will be felt in our armed forces for years to come. Yeah. Like a mantra, Liberals continually said over on that side of the floor that every decision that they were making throughout the pandemic was rooted in science, and they depended on medical professionals because they themselves were not. But here too, they went over the heads of all parliamentarians, over the head of the Speaker, and even the professional House of Commons nurse, by denying members of this House the ability to do their jobs on behalf of their constituents in this place. When it came to vaccination status and precinct access, they pushed aside the medical professional, the nurse. The Speaker ruled that she was the only one with a professional medical authority to make public health decisions for members of Parliament and House of Commons staff. The Speaker also ruled that the Board of Internal Economy had overstepped its mandate in its vaccine requirements in this place. And that is when this Prime Minister, for overt personal political purposes, blatantly overrode the scientifically supported public health decisions of the House medical professional and took his own Liberal Speaker to court for daring to do his job without partisan political interference. And then there's a time I'll never forget, the first debate that I participated in that sought to remove the government's accountability to this House. It was in regard to the environmental framework. The bill sought to give sweeping power to the minister and accountability to an advisory board. Today, with the Green Slush Fund, we're certainly hearing how good that works out for us when one minister has a little bit too much of himself. Somewhat alarmed over this, I questioned the freshly minted member from West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country, about this board. Like, what was it going to look like? How many would be on it? Where were they going to come from? And what would their credentials be to give Canadians confidence? What would their mandate be? How long would they serve? Questions like that. Well, the member could not wait to rise and say, the board's already been chosen. With debate barely initiated in this House, the deed was already done. Speaker, from the Green Slush Fund to this government's management of the pandemic, to the obsession with appointing oversight bodies with little or no accountability to Parliament, these Liberals have a very unhealthy tendency to take more and more rights and responsibilities away from opposition in the House and giving more and more power to ministers and outside governing bodies that are not accountable to this place. In September of 2016, within his very first year of winning the incredible honor and the privilege to be first servant, Prime Minister, first servant to Canadians, this Prime Minister said, and I'm quoting him here, this is at the beginning of serving this place and serving Canadians, quote, There is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada, and he concluded that he sees Canada as the first post-national state. I don't think he went to Canadians on that. These are all ideologies, behaviors, conscious decisions that are made by this government, made by this Prime Minister, to obscure and deny the depth of their political corruption. These are decisions that are made with no regard for what is best for Canada. Parliament is just an inconvenience for this Prime Minister, and it always has been. Only common sense Conservatives will end the NDP Liberal corruption. We will end their attack on Canada's sovereignty, on our institutions, on our way of life, on our democracy and rule of law, and we, on behalf of Canadians, the Conservative Party of Canada, will get the answers that Canadians deserve. They are asking for answers, and they want them. This member from Papineau and every member of this NDP Liberal government has absolutely failed in their duty to be accountable to Canadians, and Canadians have had enough. We keep hearing about, well, we need to listen to Canadians. Believe me, Madam Speaker, we have. They only have one thing that is absolutely top of mind, and that is to remove this Prime Minister and his corrupt government. Taxes are up, way up. Costs are up, way up to where Canadians cannot afford the basic things in life, and they are struggling. Crime is up, like over 100% in so many areas. What they are doing to this country is so regressive. It's regressive. It's not progressive. It is regressive. It is destroying our nation. And Canadians are saying their time is up. The vast majority of Canadians want a carbon tax election, and for them, we'll bring it home.
Hear, hear.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I get it. The member personally doesn't like the Prime Minister. And if you listen to what it is that she's talking about, she's using the issue of so-called corruption or scandals as a way to express a great deal of frustration that the member has towards the Prime Minister. But let me remind the member that Stephen Harper, and I made reference to this earlier today, when you talk about scandals, Stephen Harper and the Conservative government takes it by a country mile. We can talk about the anti-terrorism scandal. We can talk about the Phoenix scandal, the G8 spending scandal, the ETS scandal, the F-35 scandal, the Senate scandal, the multiple election scandals. These are all things in which her holier-than-thou Conservative Party, with their leader, Stephen Harper, were deeply engaged in. And unfortunately, it wasn't until the latter couple of years that Stephen Harper actually came up with the ethics commissioner, because he was so pathetic when he was the Prime Minister that he had to try to justify that he does have ethics. That's one of the reasons why he brought it into place a couple of years before he actually left, or I should say was kicked out of office. I'm wondering if she has any thoughts in terms of how unethical the Conservative government was, and how the Stephen Harper drove the economy, in particular our manufacturing industry, into the economy, and so many other things that motivated Canadians to kick Stephen Harper out of office.
The Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I'm a mom, and I'm a grandma. It's awesome, isn't it? It is. But you know what? I can guarantee that everyone in this house that when one of my kids was out of line, I didn't let them try and redirect, because this government is in power. And I can assure the member across the floor, every Canadian is hypersensitive now and hyper-aware to the shenanigans of this government. I know that in this place that we can't say that people lie. I think that is the one thing that we will never truly represent Canadians in this place when that is allowed. And to the extent that it happens, It means that debate in this House is not real. And what came out of that member's mouth was not accurate. But what they are doing clearly is, because they are before their own speaker, they are being challenged by the RCMP left and right and being investigated because they are doing things untruthfully. When you can stand in this place and say those things, I know that it is just reinforcing in the hearts and minds of Canadians that this Liberal government has got to go.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for the speech. There was a request that documents be given to the RCMP, but the RCMP has the ability to seek information and receive it if it wishes in the context of investigations. But this House only has power through the chair or through the recommendations of committees. The role that we have as opposition MPs is different from the role of the RCMP. Our role is to hold the government to account. Our role is to get information for the public, but our role is different from anything in a criminal context where the RCMP could be involved. So could my colleague speak about the importance of political parties in the House and also about the fact that the government is not currently giving us what we need in order to do our role properly?
Yes, we have the privilege and the responsibility in this place to call for those documents, to demand those documents. And that is what we are doing here in requiring this government to stop digging in its heels and pretend that they don't have to respond the way that every other government has needed to respond in these kinds of circumstances. I'm sorry, but there's no way that we should ever let up on them being required to do what they have been demanded to do by this House.
Honourable Member for Windsor West.
In April of 2010, then Speaker Peter Milliken ruled with regards to the Afghan detainee documents that the Harper government would not release at that time. We had a series of different interventions from diplomats and other whistleblowers and so forth, and Parliament then had a motion pass, and then the Speaker ruled on that in 2010. To my colleague, why was there not an attempt to correct this behavior from the Conservative government at that time under Harper, so we didn't have to relive what we're reliving right now? Because if we actually would have followed through with recommendations and we would have followed through with the path forward that the then House of Commons wanted to go and the Speaker was ruling by Milliken, we wouldn't be in this situation. So we're here. And what took place on the Conservative benches from that time when we actually had the Milliken response and decision to then the end of their government record and not cleaning up this fiasco where we can't get the documents that they actually seek today, that we seek and the Bloc seeks as well?
Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Well, I thank the member for the question. However, I know that it was already asked, and my fellow colleague who serves as our Shadow Minister for Defence gave a very accurate response to that question. And when it comes to our armed forces, believe me, it is very important in my heart and mind as well. And let's face the facts. An election was run on that issue, and we won.
The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to ask a question to put a little more detailed flavor on this so people watching understand. The handpicked chair of SDTC, Annette Verschuren, handpicked by the Prime Minister, was put in place after the previous chair complained about the government. She tried to get $6.8 million for the Verschuren Centre at Cape Breton University from the Slush Fund, which she chaired. The Investment Committee said, oh no, that's a conflict, but guess what the Investment Committee said? The Investment Committee said, we'll use the employees here to help you get the money elsewhere. So the chair actually used the employees of the Green Slush Fund to get a further $10 million for the Verschuren Centre from Industry Canada and ACOA. And that's the least of the corruption. But that's a very specific instance of what these Liberals are trying to cover up with their hand-picked chair. So I'd like to ask the member what she thinks about that and why they're trying to prevent those documents from going to the RCMP.
Honourable member for Yorkton Melville.
Well, I thank my colleague for the question and apologize to some degree for not focusing as much as perhaps I should have on the Green Slush Fund, because it is a story unto itself that shows just the depth of inappropriateness, I don't know which words to use, to describe what these people are willing to do to fill their own pockets and the pockets of those that are part of their elite group. It is inappropriate. We need to do what is right in this place. Canadians are sick and tired of this government not caring about Canadians, as our Prime Minister has said. It's all about him. It's all about their decisions about the future of our country, and they are destroying it with their own criminal activities, and it's beyond the pale. There's nowhere to put it.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Parkland. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Yes. Surgeon River Parklands, yes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Madam Speaker. And I know some members of this House will remember, those who were here in 2004, my former mentor and predecessor, Member of Parliament John Williams, who was the chair of the Public Accounts Committee during the ad scam scandal. And I know everyone will be very sad to hear that John sadly passed away this past summer. However, John always told me in our many meetings together that one of the things that separates developed, successful countries like Canada has been is having accountability. For him, that was his go-to word, accountability. And I wonder if the member can talk to us about what happens when we don't have accountability, when governments are not held accountable. In fact, John founded an organization called Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, so that we could bring accountability across the world to all of these nations where corruption was rampant. Can the member tell us what happens when parliamentarians don't take a stand and hold governments accountable when they're doing corrupt things? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable member for Yorkton Melville, very brief answer.
Okay, well, I really do appreciate the comments and the question. The truth of the matter is, if we do not hold these people to account, Canadians will suffer even more than they already are.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Regina Westcott.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. What a sad state of affairs we've seen this week from the Liberals. Here we are engaging in what should be a serious conversation about a pressing issue, only to hear the members opposite say, but what about them? They did something worse. The old political tactic of whataboutism, the ultimate escape hatch for avoiding accountability. It's become the go-to response by the Liberals during the course of this debate. Let's step back and look at the big picture. A government gets caught red-handed in a scandal. It's clear, undeniable, and the public deserves an explanation.
Whoa. You might want to grab a coffee or something for this one.
Oh, yeah.
Because today's deep dive is a doozy.
All right.
We're going into some murky waters today.
Okay.
We're talking Canadian politics.
I'm ready.
Where, accusations of a green slush fund are just flying everywhere. And the very ideals of government transparency and accountability are being called into question.
Right. Well, and what I find so fascinating about this particular debate is how it really transcends the kind of usual partisan squabbling that we've, unfortunately become accustomed to. We're dealing with some really fundamental principles of democracy here.
Yeah.
And the potential for corruption at the highest levels.
Yeah. And you know what? And the source material for this one, I mean, talk about high stakes.
Yeah.
It's excerpts from a recent Canadian parliamentary debate on a motion of no confidence in the ruling government.
Wow.
So this is about as serious as it gets in Canadian politics.
Right.
This motion isn't just about disagreeing with a policy.
Yeah.
This is about a complete loss of faith in the government's ability to lead.
Exactly. I mean, a motion of no confidence is essentially Parliament saying, we don't trust you to govern responsibly. It's a last resort. It's a nuclear option in the political arena.
Wow.
When they get to that point.
Yeah. And at the heart of this political firestorm is the term Green Slush Fund.
Okay.
Which, honestly, I love the term.
Yep.
It was coined by the opposition to describe what they allege is a blatant misuse of taxpayer dollars.
Yeah. I mean, the term itself is quite inflammatory, isn't it?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, it immediately conjures up images of money being wasted, right?
Total.
Siphoned away from its intended purpose.
Yeah.
And in this case, that purpose was promoting sustainable development and green technology in Canada.
Right. So let's break down the specifics then.
Okay.
So the opposition is pointing the finger at a government body called SDTC, Sustainable Development Technology Canada.
Okay.
They claim that, get this, $390 million in contracts were awarded improperly.
Wow.
$390 million.
And they don't just throw out that number, right?
Right.
They actually back it up with specific examples.
Okay.
Like $58 million.
Okay.
Going to projects that, according to them, can't even demonstrate a clear environmental benefit.
Yeah. Right. Which seems to completely contradict the entire mission of SDTC.
Exactly, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it seems a tad
a little off,
counterintuitive, shall we say?
Yeah.
But wait.
There's more.
There's more. Hold on to your hats, everybody. There's more. They found $334 million linked to projects where board members had potential conflicts of interest.
Oh.
Talk about a tangled web we weave.
This is where that slush fund label really starts to gain some traction.
Yeah.
Because the opposition is arguing that instead of funding legitimate green projects, the money was funneled to companies with ties to the ruling party.
Of course.
Essentially lining their own pockets with taxpayer money.
Yeah, it's giving serious quid pro quo vibes. But hold on to your hats, you guys, because it gets even more convoluted.
I don't know.
The opposition is now claiming the government is engaging in a cover-up.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're accusing the government of stonewalling.
Right.
Their requests for unredacted documents related to SDTC. And they were claiming that this refusal is a blatant breach of parliamentary privilege.
Okay, for those of us who aren't constitutional scholars, what exactly does parliamentary privilege mean in this context?
So essentially, it refers to the special rights and immunities that members of parliament have to allow them to perform their duties freely.
Okay.
This includes the right to access information, even sensitive information.
Right.
To ensure government accountability.
Okay.
So by refusing to release these documents,
the
opposition is arguing the government is obstructing their ability to do their job.
Right.
Which, strikes at the very heart of the democratic process.
It's like they're saying, trust us, we're the government, but then refusing to show any transparency into their actions.
Exactly. And this lack of transparency feeds directly into the opposition's narrative of a government that's become unaccountable to the people that it's supposed to represent.
And if that wasn't enough to make your head spin,
oh boy,
this whole SDTC scandal gets tied to another even more unsettling accusation.
All right.
So tell me about this Ebola Wuhan lab connection.
Okay.
Because this is where things get really interesting.
This is where the debate takes a little bit of a turn into the realm of, international intrigue, wouldn't you say? So the opposition MP brings up another instance of the government refusing to release documents. This time, these documents are related to scientists working at a Canadian lab who had ties to the Chinese military.
Okay.
These scientists were involved in research on dangerous viruses.
Yeah.
Including, and this is where it gets really explosive, potential links to the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Wait, so the opposition is suggesting a possible connection between Canadian government-funded research scientists with ties to the Chinese military and the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Precisely.
Right.
And while they don't explicitly state it, the implication is clear.
Yeah.
Is there something more to this story?
Right.
What are they hiding that could be potentially damaging?
Yeah. Right. And remember, this is all happening against the backdrop of, heightened anxieties about global health security.
Of course.
Particularly in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Exactly.
For gosh, this is like a political thriller, like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
But this is real life with real implications.
Absolutely.
We're talking about serious allegations of government misconduct, potential conflicts of interest, and now international intrigue with potential ties to a global pandemic.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg, believe it or not.
Oh, no.
The debate doesn't end there.
Okay.
It spills over into accusations.
Okay.
Related to the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic itself.
Right.
And that's where we see the emotional temperature in this debate really start to rise.
Okay, so we've got alleged corruption with this green slush fund.
Yeah.
A potential cover-up whispers of international intrigue.
Right.
And now we're adding the COVID-19 pandemic into the mix.
It's a lot.
This is getting intense.
It really highlights the multifaceted nature of this debate, right?
Yes.
It's not just about one issue.
Right.
It's about a perceived pattern of behavior from the government.
Right.
That has a lot of people concerned.
Yeah. So we've got this explosive cocktail of accusations being hurled at the government, right?
Right.
How do they even respond to all this?
Yeah.
Do they offer any explanations, any attempts to clear the air?
Well, the government and its supporters do respond.
Okay.
But their defense strategy might not be what you'd expect. Instead of directly addressing the green slush fund allegations or the withheld documents, they opt for a tactic that's as old as politics itself.
Okay, let me guess.
What about ism?
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The classic, but they did it too, defense?
Exactly.
Not exactly a profile in courage or transparency.
Precisely. They bring up past scandals from previous administrations, particularly those led by conservative governments.
Right.
The implication being that this kind of behavior is nothing new. This is just how the game is played.
Yeah.
They try to paint the opposition's outrage as, hypocritical and politically motivated.
Right. So they're essentially saying that two wrongs make a right.
Yeah, pretty much.
Or at least that everyone's been somewhat naughty.
Yeah.
So why the fuss now?
In a nutshell, yes.
Yeah.
They're trying to shift the focus away from the immediate accusations.
Yeah.
Muddy the waters just enough to create confusion and doubt.
Right.
It's a very,
It's an effective tactic.
It's a way of tapping into a sense of cynicism that many people already have about politics in general.
Right.
The idea that they're all corrupt.
They're all corrupt anyway, yeah.
That nothing ever changes.
Yeah, I can see how that would be an effective strategy.
Right.
At least in the short term.
In the short term, for sure.
It avoids answering the hard questions.
Yeah.
Deflects responsibility, but does it actually address the core issues at hand?
Right. That's the question.
I mean, does it answer the question of whether there was actual wrongdoing
in
the allocation of these green technology funds? Exactly. Or whether the government is deliberately obstructing Parliament's right to investigate?
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
The government's response, while strategically savvy, perhaps ultimately sidesteps the real issue of accountability. And this is where the debate really highlights a crucial aspect of a functioning democracy.
Okay.
Right? The importance of holding all governments accountable, regardless of their political affiliation.
Right. It shouldn't be about scoring partisan points or deflecting blame.
It's bigger than that.
It's about ensuring that the public trust is upheld.
Yes.
That those in power are held to a higher standard.
Exactly. It's about the fundamental principle.
Yes.
That those who govern are accountable to the governed.
Right.
And that's why this debate really resonates so strongly, I think. Even beyond the specifics of these accusations themselves.
Yeah.
It raises some serious questions about the health of Canadian democracy.
Yeah.
And the erosion of trust in those we elect to represent us.
It's like they're saying, move along, nothing to see here.
Yeah.
When in reality, there might be a lot more going on beneath the surface. Yeah. And this is where I think it becomes really important for everyday Canadians to pay attention.
Absolutely. This isn't just some political game being played out in the halls of Parliament.
Yeah.
This is about the very principles that underpin a functioning democracy.
Yeah. So we've got the government responding with whataboutism, attempting to deflect blame, muddy the waters. But the opposition's pushing back, demanding accountability, transparency.
Yeah.
Where does this leave us?
So where do we go from here? Yeah.
What are the potential consequences of this kind of political maneuvering?
Yeah.
And is there anything that can be done to address the underlying issues?
Well, one clear consequence is that it further deepens existing political divides.
Okay.
And it erodes trust in the government.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but it's kind of disheartening, right? To see like these kinds of accusations being thrown around and to hear the government's response, or but really lack thereof. Yes. like, it really makes you wonder, what does this all mean for the average Canadian, right?
Right.
What's the takeaway for, like, everyday people who are just trying to make sense of it all?
I think this deep dive has really given us a front row seat to the complexities of a, functioning, or perhaps in this case, malfunctioning democracy.
Right.
The opposition's playing their part, right?
Yeah.
Challenging the government, demanding accountability.
Okay.
But is it enough?
Right.
Are those democratic ideals actually being upheld?
Yeah.
Or is it all just political theater?
That is the million-dollar question.
It is.
It feels like we're at this, like, crossroads,
Yeah.
where the very foundation of trust in government is at stake.
And that's where you, the listener, come in.
Oh, okay.
Right? I mean, the opposition can demand answers.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's public pressure that carries real weight. If Canadians are outraged by these accusations, if they demand better from their elected officials, it can be a powerful catalyst for change.
Okay.
But if this is just brushed aside as politics as usual,
right,
well, that's a very different story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's about being, informed, engaged citizens.
Yes.
And demanding that transparency from those in power.
Exactly.
And speaking of which, the opposition's fight for access to those government documents is a perfect example of this, right? They're arguing that the public has a right to know,
of course,
how their money is being spent, especially when there are allegations of wrongdoing.
Absolutely. That right to information, that transparency.
Yeah.
That's the cornerstone of a healthy democracy. Without it, there can be no true accountability.
It can feel like overwhelming, though, can it?
It can, yeah.
It's like trying to navigate a maze blindfolded,
Yeah.
This whole thing with the green slush fund, the Wuhan lab connection, the pandemic-related accusations, it's a lot.
It's a lot to unpack, yeah.
It's easy to get, like, bogged down in the complexities of it all and just kind of tune it out.
Yeah, I understand that sentiment.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that these debates, these fights for transparency and accountability, they matter.
They do.
They shape the very fabric of our society. They impact how our government functions.
Right.
And ultimately, they determine the kind of future that we're building.
It's about, like, holding on to that sense of hope that things can change.
Right.
That our voices as citizens can make a difference.
Absolutely.
So as we resurface from this deep dive into Canadian politics, we're left with a lot to think about.
Yeah.
We've unpacked the accusations, analyzed the responses, and we explored the implications. We did. But maybe the most important takeaway here is don't let this be the end of the story.
Don't let it be the end,
If you were in the shoes of those opposition MPs, what would your next move be?
Yeah, that's the question.
How would you continue to fight for answers, for accountability, for a government that truly represents the people?
Keep asking those questions.
Yeah.
Keep digging for the truth, because the health of our democracy really does depend on it.
You've been listening to The Deep Dive.
Thanks for listening.